somebody who cares enough to do the right thing, and somebody that when these people are crying out in the dark and in desperation for help, that there's someone who's answering that call. So I can't think of a greater purpose for living, or someone that I could admire or respect more. And so, Judd, I just want to welcome you.
Hey, thank you for having me on. Thank you so much.
Thank you for all that you do. This is such an important conversation, and it's one that really shocked me years ago when I discovered what was really happening in Nigeria to the Christians. And I was just astonished that there's nothing. I get that, the world doesn't care about Africa because I was born and raised in Africa, and I've been fighting, to get those kind of stories that relate to Africa, elevating those all my career. But this is about Christians. Yeah. There are churches all over the world. There are church leaders. There's, the Vatican. And yet the world is just standing by, letting these people be murdered.
You couldn't have said it better myself. It's an absolute tragedy what is happening to Christians in Nigeria, and I want everybody listening to really get this and understand this statistic. Okay, they say, why Nigeria? Nigeria is responsible for 90% of all Christian persecution deaths worldwide in the last 5 years.
Yeah, it's just incredible.
And no one hears about it. No one's talking about it. We see a lot of tragedies and issues that happen across the spectrum. We saw what happened in Israel, when Hamas came over and kidnapped and killed all these Israelis, and it got world attention, and
rightly so.
And rightly so.
Yeah.
And still gets world attention, and thank God. But the thing is the same thing is happening to Nigerians on a daily basis and gets no coverage whatsoever.
And has been happening on a daily basis since 9/11.
Yes.
That's one of the things that I learned reporting on this, is that just, it was astonishing to me, is that on the very day that 9/11, that the attacks happened in the United States, the same people who were on those planes, and I mean in the sense of they were carrying the same flag and they were saying the same slogans and they were standing for the same ideology, walked into a village in northern Nigeria and massacred over 200 Christians. And that village was called Rankum, and it was renamed in the language of the Fulani terrorists, Muslim terrorists who were the ones who went and killed everybody. They took that village and they renamed it Mahanga because it is essentially the command and control center of this genocide.
Yes, and the interesting part is that the Nigerian government knows it. The U.S. government should know it, and if they're paying attention, I hope they know it now. But this is where the majority of terror attacks are staged and launched from. And like I said, everybody in Nigeria knows where it's coming from. They see the terrorists coming in and out of Mahanga.
And they chose Mahanga. I mean, translated, the word means watchtower.
Watchtower.
Because it's on high ground.
Mm-hmm.
And it was perfectly positioned for them for what began as a series that's now more than 20 years of attacks.
20 years of attacks, and tens of thousands, no, I'd say hundreds of thousands have now been killed, staged from that ground.
And wounded and forced out.
And so that's killed. Over 100,000 Christians have been killed. Now, let's talk about the people that are still alive. They're now in camps called IDP camps, which stands for internally displaced person. And we estimate that there's between 3 to 5 million IDPs right now. These are Christians without homes, without villages, that are living in camps.
These are people who've been robbed of everything they had, who've been forced off their land, and basically are mired in poverty and misery because very often the Nigerian government won't even acknowledge their existence.
No, acknowledge their existence, and this it's a double-edged sword. So you have IDP camps. Then when the Nigerian government doesn't recognize an IDP camp within their own country, that means there's no UN. That means there's no Red Cross. That means there's no other NGO, official government organization, USAID, or what used to be USAID, means those people get zero help. if the Nigerian government doesn't establish and say, this is an official camp. And we know that Nigeria government only recognizes 40% of the camps that exist. So that means 60% of these millions of IDPs get zero help from the outside world.
It also, it raises the curious question of why does the Nigerian government not acknowledge the existence of these people?
There's a few different reasons. One of the main reasons is the Nigerian government likes to lie to itself. And they also like to pretend that things are better than they actually are. And by doing so, if the Nigerian government says it doesn't exist, well, then the rest of the world says it doesn't exist. And that means Nigeria looks better on paper for whatever reason. Mm-hmm. And it's like a dog and pony show that the Nigerian government likes to play.
Well, if you admit to the world that Christians are being systematically and intentionally massacred on your watch and cleansed from the land as they are being, then you have to do something about it. The world expects you to do something about it.
Well, then you're supposed to do something about it. So there's the other part of this is that, yes, the Nigerian government is complicit, especially in the last, 8 years with 2 Muslim presidents in a row where they have turned a blind eye to the killings and have done nothing to stop it.
Well, when they actually know that killings are going to happen and they don't intervene.
Yes, and that's one of the things. So as part of our organization, we created Truth Nigeria, a outlet for journalists in Nigeria to tell the truth, because the Nigerian government doesn't want this information getting out. And if the Nigerian government doesn't say the story's getting out, they're not reporting it. And so we want to give an outlet to Truth Nigeria. So part of that project is we've been able to get intelligence and issue terror alerts. And so in 2024, we issued over 64 terror alerts.
And you issue a terror alert when what is happening?
So when we issue a terror alert, the police are notified, military is notified, local government officials are notified, the villages are notified. And
they're notified of what?
That there's an impending attack coming to your area.
And how do you know that?
Intelligence.
From having your ear to the ground.
From
locally.
having our ear to the ground. We have our organizations operating in villages all over Nigeria, and people talk, people know things, and we've told people, if you hear something, you hear something, see something,
speak up.
Us know.
Okay, so just so people understand, you have your organization Equipping the Persecuted.
Yes.
And that does what exactly?
So Equipping the Persecuted was formed to be a boots-on-the-ground mission to respond to the attacks of persecuted Christians. So to the best of our ability and the resources we have, we try to respond to an attack within 48 hours with food, medicine, aid, anything we can do to help these people that have lost everything they had. And a lot of it, because when the villages are burned and razed to the ground, all the food supply is destroyed. Mm-hmm. They have no sleeping mats. They're just left with the clothes on their backs. Mm. And so the first thing they need is food. They need medicine. And then what became a big part of our mission is we now really help the wounded victims that are still surviving. Mm. So we
confidence that it's fake news and conspiracy.
Let me walk you through how Nigeria news operates.
Okay.
It's one of the most silly things I've ever seen, and it's laughable, but it's also super depressing at the same time. So, in order to get a story out of Nigeria and get it in Nigerian news, a government official has to call a press conference. And when the government official calls a press conference, that means the journalist can then show up, because all the journalists are getting money from the government to cover the stories. So if said government official doesn't hold a press conference, the story never happened. The incident it doesn't exist.
It's incredible. And, I have to say this because this will really, I think, help people understand what we're dealing with here. For years, the narrative of the Nigerian government has been parroted by the U.S. government. Yes. And they have literally blamed the killings on climate change.
Oh, my God.
I know it sounds incredible, climate change. And the reason they say that is because the the people carrying out these attacks, the Fulani, who are mostly members of the Fulani tribe, which is a nomadic Islamic tribe, they say they're being forced to migrate because of climate change. And as they're moving south, because the north of Nigeria obviously is Muslim and the south is Christian predominantly. And so as they're moving south from the north of the country, they're going into these Christian areas, and that's where these clashes are happening.
Yeah. So let me explain this real fast for the average viewer. You just have to take a moment and think about the absolute devastation and the goal of the United States Embassy, successive ambassadors, to literally pass this off as climate change. I don't think that there's a hell miserable enough for people like that. Oh, they're going to be suffering eternal judgment for what they've done here on earth and their complicity and willful ignorance. Let me explain how this works as far as the farmer-herder clash and then climate change, whatever you want to call it. I can assure you that when the Fulani ethnic militia, the Muslim terrorists, go into Christian villages, they're not coming in with cattle. They're coming in on motorcycles with AK-47s and killing everything that moves, and then destroying and razing the entire village.
And yelling Allahu Akbar while they do it.
Allahu Akbar while doing it. And has nothing to do with climate change. These are nomadic herders that have 500-year-old view of cattle farming, which just takes cattle and roams them wherever they want to roam them, regardless of whose property or land they're on. They have no idea what a ranch is. They have no idea what modern farming is or what modern cattle raising is. But the fact is they don't care. It's not about nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that. It has to do with they are systematically taking over Nigeria, and they want to make Nigeria into a Muslim caliphate. Okay.
Well, and if you go back historically, people don't realize that the capital of the Muslim north of Nigeria, Sokoto, was actually the capital of the first caliphate outside. Right when Usman bin Fodio, the first caliph, established the caliphate. So that was one of the earliest jihads.
Right, it was one of the earliest jihads, but then the rest of the tribes people in Nigeria and the other tribes that said, hey, we don't want this, defeated them and shoved them back up north.
Yeah.
And then Nigeria was majority Christian.
Yes,
for a long time.
There were African religions, but the British obviously came and brought Christianity.
But when they brought Christianity, Nigeria was 70% Christian.
Amazing.
Now it's 50-50. It's 50% Muslim, 50% Christian.
Because they've been killing.
Because they have been going back to their systematic jihad. Now, look, Islam has conquered every civilization it's touched since 640 AD through three methods of jihad. One, cultural jihad. We'll move in, we'll blend in with the population as we're a minority. Then they start gaining a population, having lots of kids. Then once they get a population, they do political jihad. All right?
And cultural.
Then cultural jihad. Then after political jihad, once they have the political cover to do the violence, they go into violent jihad and take over territory. And that is how they have systematically taken over all of northern Africa.
Well, and what's particularly interesting when you dig a little deeper is that the Fulani tribe doesn't just exist in Nigeria. They're in Sierra Leone and Senegal and right across the border, right? I mean, throughout the center and east of Africa and west.
And for some magical reason, every country they touch turns into war.
Yes, and when you
turns into genocide and turns into war. Every country that they touch ends up turning into genocide and war.
So in many ways, it's a power grab for the Fulani under the black flag of Al-Qaeda and Islamic Jihad and the authority of God, right?
Under the authority of God.
And the U.S. helps them.
The U.S. helps them. And
by blaming it on climate change.
By blaming it on climate change or turning a blind eye to doing it. And
putting a Band-Aid on a little bit of the humanitarian needs, but not fundamentally changing anything.
And say they're helping. So I want to go back to Mahanga. I'm going to tell you something you probably don't know. But in Mahanga, right, the place where they're launching attacks from.
That village.
The Norwegians have just been building new houses for terrorists.
Wow.
On
The
a hu-
Norwegian Refugee Council?
Yeah, the Norwegian government has been building new houses and for people in Mahanga.
You cannot make it up.
They're building they're building terrorist new houses in Mahanga as we speak.
The same village where not a single Christian has been allowed to set foot
If you go near
since
it,
that first massacre.
Yeah, if you go near it, you get killed.
Yes, I mean, I know because when I was reporting on this story, doing this documentary film for Fox Nation, one of the things, Masara Kim, I asked him if he could go back to Mahanga because we talked a lot about that and its importance in the origin of the genocide, and he was like, I can't get into the village because no Christian will, you'll just be murdered. But what we agreed on was that he would get as close as he could and he would launch a drone because I wanted to show people that, how it was geographically positioned to be the command and control. And we did that. One of the ways I began to understand that there was an organization, when you see these images of the bodies everywhere and people screaming and, and babies that have been killed and awful videos that I've seen of, young pregnant Nigerian girl, Christian girl being beheaded while they cut her baby out at the same time. I mean, I've seen unbelievable things out of there. And when you realize it's not chaotic, actually, it looks chaotic. It's designed to look chaotic. But when you are removing the food supply, not just for a month or a few months, but for the annual food supply, when you're taking away people's ability to stay on the land, when you're burning down not just their crops, but their homes, and then you don't allow them to come back, and you're trying to instill terror in them because, let's not forget, Nigeria doesn't have the Second Amendment. So most of these people, the vast majority for 20 plus years have been unarmed and many of them asleep, right?
Well, Nigeria doesn't have a Second Amendment. They have no Second Amendment. Citizens are not allowed to protect themselves. And so when Nigerian Christians try to protect themselves a lot of the time, the Nigerian government goes and disarms them, and a week later, they get killed by these Fulani Muslim terrorists with AK-47s and what the Nigerians refer to as sophisticated weapons, military-grade weapons, 50 caliber machine guns. So for some reason, Nigeria doesn't have a Second Amendment, but the terrorists can run around with military-grade weapons with no restriction whatsoever. But the minute Nigerians want to protect their own villages, protect their farms, they get disarmed by the Nigerian government.
No, they call them vigilantes, right? And they say it's illegal.
Well, yeah. Vigilantes can exist in certain areas. So certain state governments allow vigilantes to exist and to oversee and watch their villages, but they get no help. They get no support from the government. They get disarmed quite a bit by Nigerian officials, and then they're left for dead. And this is what we're dealing with. So as part of our ministry with equipping the persecuted, one of the things we do is we come alongside those village security teams, and we do give them training. We give them communications. We give them bulletproof vests. Anything that we can do within a legal basis to help them as much as we can is what we do.
And according to some of the Nigerians that I've spoken to, they reckon that you've helped about 400,000 persecuted Christians. Does that sound right?
Yes.
That's pretty amazing. In how much time?
Since 2020, so about 4.5 years.
Wow. It kind of draws you in, doesn't it? Once you start to, of course, anyone can hear, oh, there's a genocide, and they can think, oh, that's terrible. But once you start to understand what's really happening in Nigeria, you realize that this is part of a much bigger war. This is sort of a microcosm of something that's taking place in different ways to different degrees all across the world.
And it's all the same thing. It's Islam versus everything else it doesn't like.
To understand what's really happening in Nigeria, you realize that this is part of a much bigger war. This is sort of a microcosm of something that's taking place in different ways to different degrees all across the world.
And it's all the same thing. It's Islam versus everything else it doesn't like. And what we're seeing in Nigeria, though, is a real life jihad taking place right in front of us. It's playing out right before our eyes. It's not happening so much in other countries, although we're starting to see it in places like Congo, Burkina Faso, these other smaller African countries up north that are now full-on Muslim military dictatorships. And the same thing is about to happen in Nigeria unless we put a stop to it. Now, what separates Equipping the Persecuted from other organizations and NGOs is I have the lofty goal of stopping the persecution. I start from a winning premise. I don't want to just come in and put a Band-Aid on a situation. I actually want to stop the persecution any way possible.
What do you mean? When you say any way possible, that sounds ominous, but do you mean it to be ominous?
On the ground, political, spreading the gospel, getting involved in any way we can to stop the persecution.
Well, here's something that I think most Americans probably don't realize, and it's something that really shocked me when I found out, is that, as you know, the last Christian president of Nigeria was Jonathan.
Good luck, Jonathan.
Yeah, good luck, Jonathan. It's just a fabulous name, right? Good luck, Jonathan. And I remember he was ruling Nigeria when Obama was in office. Obama didn't like Nigeria's stance on homosexuals and Christians. Well, I'm saying Christians, but, that was an issue for him with Uganda. And with Nigeria, there you have the most populated nation in Africa, some of the most important trade routes for the world.
Yes.
And yet the first Black president of the United States didn't make it to visit Nigeria, which was one thing. So in his second term, he sends John Kerry, who was then Secretary of State.
Yep.
And where does John Kerry go? Not to the capital, the Christian capital in the south, not to Abuja.
He goes up north.
To Sokoto.
Yes. Meets the Sultan of Sokoto.
To the historic Islamic head of the caliphate. To go, and by the way, the election campaign was happening. And at the time, Jonathan Goodluck was running against Muhammad Buhari, who was the Muslim candidate who had been in the military, who had been responsible for a coup previously, so not known to be the greatest Democrat.
Oh, he was a terrorist.
Yeah.
Buhari was a terrorist. And did you know that Obama sent Democrat campaign operatives to help Buhari beat Jonathan?
Yes, David Axelrod.
Yeah, sent David Axelrod.
Help manage his campaign.
To Nigeria to help the guy that was responsible for terrorism and was on the side of killing Christians. The Democrats sent one of their biggest campaign guys down to Nigeria to help defeat a Christian candidate. Which
sent a message to the country of Nigeria that the United States backed Muhammad Buhari and not Goodluck Jonathan.
Correct. And it was devastating. And ironically, so let's look at the big picture. I'm sorry. Let's look at the big picture here. While Obama is helping Buhari get elected, we also saw the Arab Spring happen. The Arab Spring all across the Middle East, where all these dictators were, removed, destabilized, which essentially then created ISIS and created the full radical Islamization of all these Middle Eastern countries. And at the same time, he's helping the radical Muslims in Nigeria take over Nigeria.
Well, this is starting to sort of emerge as a consistent pattern.
Yes.
With Obama more and more. I mean, I didn't see that for many years. In the beginning, I was in Cairo when he made his speech to the Muslim world, and I feel like such an idiot now. I really didn't understand what he was doing. I mean, he didn't fundamentally change the U.S. He fundamentally helped change the world for the worse. And how many people have been massacred and killed because of that radical Islamist push and backing that Obama did? Well, over 100,000 Christians in Nigeria alone.
Now, how many Christians dead in Syria? How many Christians dead in Egypt? How many Christians dead in Iraq?
Well, you can there's a direct correlation with Nigeria that is just astonishing. The fact that David Axelrod, a well-known American political operative, is working on the campaign of an Islamic candidate, is running against a Christian president. Yes. I mean, you just can't make that up.
No, you can't make it up. And it did happen. It did happen, folks. I'm going to look at the camera. It did happen. They
So when you look at that and then you put that together with the fact that the U.S. is still trying to blame this on climate change, and then you look at what Obama did, to make it harder for Nigerian Christians to come as refugees to claim asylum in the U.S.
Yeah.
Trump went some way to addressing those issues. Then Biden sent it back, turned back the clock, and now Trump is looking at addressing it again. But you have to wonder if the Office of Faith that Trump has created, and then doesn't he have an office now in the DOJ to investigate the persecution of Christians?
Persecution of Christians, yes. So we have been actively working, trying to contact people in the State Department, people in the new administration, to advocate on behalf of Nigeria. Right now, it's just kind of at the bottom of the list with all the other stuff that they're going on, the cutting, the gutting that's happening. But we as Equipping the Persecuted are actively contacting politicians and people in the State Department to say, hey, something needs to be done about Nigeria. And it needs to be done now. And it has to go farther than the big push of designating Nigeria as a country of particular concern.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is the opportunity, right, for the State Department to raise their hand and say, okay, we're not gonna stand by any longer.
Right. We're not going to stand by any longer. And I advocate for a very strong foreign policy in regards to Nigeria, predicated on the safety and the protection of Christians in Nigeria.
Okay, well, let me ask you this, because one of the things that I just don't understand is why there are so few Christian leaders, whether they be church leaders, or the Vatican or anybody else, that seems to care about a genocide that is literally happening on their watch.
Well, let me go into some of that, if you wouldn't mind. In Nigeria, there's a very corrupt Christian class, and the Christian leaders in Nigeria are extremely corrupt, and they're actually paid by the government to toe government talking points and to toe the line and to say the government talking points. So when Christian leaders in the U.S. say, oh, we want to talk to Christian leaders in Nigeria, they're getting paid to look the other way and say, oh, no, it's not that bad here. And I can point to several examples of that happening. And I can also point to key people in major religious organizations. And I spoke to a gentleman who's very high up in a Catholic organization. It was about 2 months ago, very high up in the Catholic organization, getting responsible for millions of dollars to help Christian efforts. And this guy is touted that he goes to Nigeria all the time, goes to Nigeria and helps out people in Nigeria all the time. And I had a chance to sit face to face with him at a lunch. And I said, sir, I've been to Benue State. Benue State is 90% Catholic, one of the most Catholic regions in Nigeria. Now, he's Mr. Catholic guy. And I said, I've been to Benue. I've been to the IDP camps. I have people on the ground in Benue. And I said, you said you've gone to Nigeria 1 million times and done all this stuff. And I said, in regards to Benue, I looked at him, I said, where are you? Because I see no fruit of your efforts anywhere. And he proceeded to tell me that Christians weren't being persecuted in Benue, that it was just tribal clashes.
Seriously?
Dead serious. And I found out later that he was also getting some money from USAID.
And who was this person?
I can't say right now. But I was very, 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 very upset, and I wanted to reach across the table and punch him.
I don't blame you.
But this is indicative of what's going on with some of these large organizations that claim to be Christian. If they had their hands in government money, they're also not allowed to say Muslims are killing Christians in Nigeria. Because they're on the take.
That is a disappointing story that seems to be all over the world.
So you want to know why people aren't talking about it? Because it is still, even in many Christian circles, even so-called conservative Christian circles, it is politically incorrect to say that Muslims are killing Christians in Nigeria.
Yes, I can see that.
But even Christian leaders in America are protecting and somehow wanting to keep that politically correct line.
Well, if people care about the truth, and I really do mean this, I'm not saying this to sort of elevate you or to flatter you, but if they want the truth, they should all follow Truth Nigeria.
Yeah, go to truthnigeria.com. That's why we exist.
I mean, it's no frills there. I mean, you're not embellishing or adding. You don't need to, because the truth is so horrific.
Yeah, and we actually say who's killing who.
Yes. So you have the formidable Doug Burton, who is part of Truth Nigeria, who's a wonderful journalist, who many years ago went to a talk at the National Press Club about Nigeria and got involved like that. And, you know, like me and probably like you, right? He just, once he found the truth about what was happening there.
You can't look the other way. And the thing I love about Doug Burton is that his passion and wanting to get involved. And he's even risked, career opportunities because he focused on Nigeria and made other publications mad because he kept on bugging them about, why aren't you printing stuff about Nigeria?
Yeah, he's been relentless. He's also, he's a great old school journalist / editor.
Traditional, and I love it.
Yeah. Ray Bongo, Luca Benayat, I think Tom Garber was with him for a while before he went on his own, and Doug kind of brought them together. The first time I interviewed Masar, do you know that he had to go next door and borrow fuel for the generator just to have the power, to be on the phone? Yeah.
Yeah, it
might have been Lawrence that did that.
Well, people have to understand that. I mean, it's like these guys don't have power.
No.
They don't have power. A lot of them don't have running water.
Yeah.
And so they're using outdated laptops, very awful cell phones to put together these stories. And then when we created Truth Nigeria, it's like, okay, let's get them a little equipment. Let's do a little bit of an upgrade here. Let's get some laptops out to these guys. And in certain instances, I don't want to give away specific areas, but there's a couple areas they can go to where they can have access to Starlink. So they have access to internet to be able to upload things and be able to do things they have.
See.
So we provided Starlink for them.
Wow, that would have been incredible.
So that's been a huge help to them.
I mean, I just know so many times over the years now where, one time I spoke to Lawrence and he was in the back of a van and he was surrounded by corpses, taking people to the morgue. And, another time, 8 of his in-laws just got massacred.
Yeah, just in the last 2 weeks.
In a Sunday massacre, another bloody Sunday in Nigeria.
Palm Sunday massacre.
I mean, and they are, the level of brutality of these people when they go into a place is staggering.
And they think they're doing it for God. They think they're doing it for Allah. They think they're doing a good thing when they do it. But they're murdering and massacring little children, the elderly, and anything that moves. And it's not humane. It's not a humane killing. They torture and kill. Yes.
Well, actually, let's talk about that because one of the Truth Nigeria journalists, Mike O'Day James, he just did an interview with CBN, Christian Broadcasting Network, that got a little bit of attention. And one of the things that he talked about was interviewing these people who are kidnapped.
Yeah.
And who are held there's a bunch of camps, right? Truth Nigeria has done a lot of reporting on this. They're held in a series of camps in the forest. In the
Rajana area, Kaduna, between Kaduna and Plateau, kind of on the border in those areas. We know of 3 camps that are housing over 600 to 1,000 Christians right now that are kidnapped, that are being tortured daily in these camps. And when I mean tortured daily, they get beat when they defecate. They have to go to the bathroom. While they go to the bathroom, they get whipped. They get caned. They're being starved and tortured to death. And if ransom isn't paid up, they'll execute little brothers and sisters in front of siblings and video it and try to get that to raise money so the living relatives can get ransomed out of the camps. And this has been a thing with us as Equipping the Persecuted, is we are now getting calls when people get out of these camps, whether they escape or they're ransomed out, because they come out looking like Holocaust survivors.
I've seen it.
They're so malnourished. They have all these diseases and all this awful things going on with. They can hardly walk. And so we've come to, when they come out, we've come to their aid and get them medical care, nurse them back to health, get them spiritual health. I mean, pray over them and try to get them back into a livable type situation. In fact, there were 2 girls that just came out of the camp that Mike interviewed, and they missed school. They're trying to figure out a way to survive. And so we're coming alongside. We're taking 2 girls that came out of there that are 20 and 18, and we're putting them in school. We're paying for their school fees to make sure they get out, and we're enrolling them, one of them, into a nursing college because that's what she wanted to do.
That you are doing God's work.
And these are real people. All right. We can talk about statistics. We can talk about numbers, but these are sisters. These are mothers. These are children. These are grandchildren. These are real people.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was Lawrence sent me footage of one of these sort of reunions where a bunch of kids had been kidnapped from a school, which is consistent. I'm sure everybody remembers the Chibok schoolgirls. That was just in the early days. It's continued over and over and over again. And they'll take them in a group, and then those who can pay ransom, right? Or the parents will pay a ransom, collect and pay a ransom. They don't even know who's coming out. They don't even know who they're going to release.
Yeah.
Like they go there waiting to see if their loved ones will appear. And so many of them couldn't walk. I mean, it was hard to watch.
Yeah. They feed them once every 2 weeks. 2 weeks. They give them no care, and they beat them and torture them on a regular basis. And
when they figure out if the family's really poor and they can't scramble money from anywhere, they just execute the family.
Yeah, they'll just execute the family. They'll execute the kids in front of them. One girl that I talked to witnessed 20 people killed in front of her eyes.
Good Lord.
Including her sister.
Well, here's another one that will make people upset, and should make them upset, is when the Chibok schoolgirls happened. Remember, Michelle Obama stood out there with bring back our girls.
Bring back our girls. Yeah.
Hashtag bring back our girls. So I've spoken now to a number of different people in intelligence, and the U.S. had located that group of girls within hours to a facility not very far from where they were kidnapped.
Right.
And had the ability, had the men standing by. I mean, there is AFRICOM, and we have a lot of resources, and people were standing by, and they were raising their hands, and they were saying, okay, we know where they are, let's get them. And Obama said no.
I know. Dog and pony show. Obama doesn't care about Christians. He doesn't care about the plight of innocent Christians. He's helped governments execute hundreds of thousands of Christians through his policy, and he knows what he's doing. He knew what he did.
Just makes you sick to your stomach. Makes me sick to my stomach anyway.
Oh, but oh yay. Oh yay, we elected Obama. Transformation in the country.
Yeah.
Yeah, people had no idea what they were voting for.
No, they really didn't. But they were deceived.
It's because they didn't do the digging, and the media did us a very disservice by not digging into who he actually was.
Those were the days when you still believed that, journalists did their jobs and elected officials actually meant what they said. At least some of the time.
Not for me. I was always a skeptic, but that's... but no, this is what we're dealing with. We're dealing with the aftermath of this, and people really need to take a hard look in the mirror and really look at not what they say, but what they do when it comes to politicians, when it comes to people. It's not what they say, it's what do they do, and then look at their underlying philosophy of life and where it comes from. And that's the biggest mistake that the media in the United States does. And that's the biggest mistake that people, when they're voting for a politician, they listen to what they say. They don't pay attention to who they are, what they do, and what their fundamental belief system is.
No, and with Nigeria, ostensibly we are still a Christian country.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So you would think that there is a duty to stand for other Christians.
There's a duty to stand for other Christians. There's a duty for Nigerian Christians to stand for other Christians. Now, I want to go into this from a ministry standpoint. So we are a ministry. We're equipping the persecuted. We are unapologetically Christian, and we do share the gospel, which doesn't get us a lot of Christmas cards from other NGOs. But one of the things that we found in Nigeria, and it's the same problem here in the United States, is that there is what I call the heresy of pietism, a pietistic mindset in Nigeria where they felt that it was sinful to get involved in politics and that it was sinful to defend yourself. It's sinful to stand up and protect your family. We call it pietism. It's a very error in Christian teaching that says Christians should stay out of politics and government affairs.
I would argue that that's got nothing to do with Christian teaching, and that is Marxist, globalist teaching. Well, and that it's not just in Nigeria, it's all over the world. Why do you think Steve Maxwell founded the Remnant Alliance? Because...
Yes. Oh, exactly. But, well, I'll kick back on that. I know where pietism was invented.
Where?
It was invented before Marxism.
Yes, it was. You're right.
Pietism was invented by the Lutherans.
Actually.
In the German king, with Frank and Spinner, because the German king got tired of Christians bugging him, telling him what to do. So he paid with German money, government money, to fund an ideology called pietism, which encouraged Christians to get out of politics.
I will add to that. It actually began with an organization that was founded a few months after the United States was founded as a country. In Bavaria, the leader of Bavaria at the time, Weishaupt, established the Illuminati. And the Illumins, who monitored and tracked the movement of pilgrims coming to the United States to set up this country and didn't take it very seriously, were shocked when the British Empire was defeated.
Yes.
And so they studied, how did this happen? Because now they've been blindsided. So they formally organized. The Illuminati was tasked with infiltrating the Masons, because the Masons were the most powerful secret society at that time. And they were tasked with figuring out exactly how they lost such important strategic ground and such a big battle.
This is true, yes.
And what did they find? They read in the letters of the 13 colonies that it was organized in the congregations of the churches.
Yes.
So that is when they then began, for the next 100 years, to try to infiltrate the congregations. And it didn't achieve what they wanted, so they then went, at the turn of the century, for the seminaries.
Yes.
And revolutionary theology was born out of the Catholics, but implemented by the Lutherans.
Implemented by the Lutherans and pushed forward by the Catholics. And there was a deliberate, so it's not just to render Christians neutral on the right side, it's to eventually turn Christians to the left.
It's to destroy Christianity entirely.
Right. And so look at every church that's embraced liberation theology and revolutionary theology. All of them are falling apart. All these once great churches have all completely disintegrated.
Because they have nothing to do with God.
Because there's nothing to do with God. They've embraced a false gospel, which has replaced the Lord and salvation in Jesus Christ with social justice. Well, if you take out Jesus Christ and Lord from the mix of a church, what's going to happen? Boom. Oh, sorry. Boom, it's going to blow up.
Yeah.
And so, but we're seeing the same effect in Nigeria with Nigerian Christians.
Which is very interesting, because what you then see coming out of that is this idea that the churches have to separate themselves from politics.
Right.
But then politics is infested into every part of life.
Right.
So it basically means you're creating these little bubbles. Do you know, I actually interviewed pastors. One of them told me that for his first 13 years as a pastor, he was a secular humanist. So he
Doesn't
literally...
surprise me.
How can you be a pastor and the word secular be anywhere near you? I mean, it means you don't even believe in God. And then other pastors told me about pagan rituals inside the seminaries, taking place inside the seminaries.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is why the Remnant Alliance was born, which works with pastors to show them how they have, this doctrine doesn't come from God. It's not in the Bible. It comes from revolutionary theology, which is a tactic to subvert God and the faith.
Yes. And it is permeated everywhere. And so as an organization in Nigeria, we work with pastors and we teach them that it's okay to get involved in politics from a biblical standpoint. We teach them that it's okay to defend yourselves from a biblical standpoint. Mm-hmm. And we've had pastors come up and just hug us crying in tears saying, we knew something was wrong with this teaching. We just couldn't figure it out. Thank you for helping us.
Wow.
And that's one of the other ways that we stop the persecution in Nigeria is we correct the bad theology.
I do want to acknowledge Bishop Wilfred. Let me make sure I say his Anagbe.
Anagbe, yes.
Yes, Bishop, because he's been so brave.
Yes, Bishop Anagbe is a wonderful man, and he's really doing the Lord's work.
He's speaking up. He's a Nigerian pastor.
Yeah, and his counterparts,
Nigerian bishop, excuse me.
Nigerian bishop, but his counterparts are angry at him and tell him to shut up.
Because they don't want the truth.
And there's another bishop I'd like to acknowledge, Bishop Dugu, who's also doing the Lord's work. Now
he's from the north, right? He's from
he's from Benue.
He's from Benue. There's another one from the north. Let me see what's his Bishop Kuka.
Bishop Kuka. So there are Catholic priests that are speaking out.
Yes,
but they are doing it against the orders of their counterparts because. In the organization, there's a lot of corruption in there. And the same thing with all the other denominations.
And they're being threatened.
They're being threatened.
It'd be a miracle if they survive.
There's called the Equa denomination. There's Baptists. There's different Pentecostal denominations. And there are pastors in all these denominations that are starting to speak out. But the larger organizations are trying to tell them to be quiet. You're just going to make things messy for us.
And let's reflect for a moment on what they're quiet about. I mean, can you paint a picture for people at this genocide? What is happening? It began, with the takeover of Rancune, which was renamed Mahanga, and that operates as the kind of command and control center.
Right.
And then what happened?
And then what happened is they have systematically destroyed well over 300 to 400 small communities that are all now Muslim.
So the Christians, they go in there, often on motorbikes, often high, right? I've seen.
The Fulani terrorists, yeah.
Yeah, and they just they kill everything.
They kill everything they can. They use up all their bullets, and if they run out of bullets, they use machetes, and they go kill as many as they can. And then remember, so it could be a small amount, 50 dead, 100 dead, and I even hate to say that in those terms, but then now. Everyone else in that community is now displaced.
Yes, and they burn the churches down.
They burn the churches. The first thing they do is they try to kill the pastors and they burn the churches. That's the first thing they go after.
And and most of Nigeria is blissfully unaware.
Because one, they're not getting the news. A lot of them aren't hearing about what's going on.
Yeah.
Because if it's not in the Nigerian news, no one knows about it. And that's why Truth Nigeria is there, and that's why we're trying to get as much awareness about this as possible. But
yeah, I really, and where do people find you, by the way? TruthNigeria.com,
TruthNigeria.com, right? And then they can partner with us at equippingthepersecuted.org. That's equippingthepersecuted.org.
We'll have a link on the website, and we'll post it on social media as well.
Thank you.
Because you're not one of those organizations that's stealing from the taxpayer and wasting the money. You're actually really doing God's work in Nigeria. And it's quite something because this has been going on for a long time now. This is more than 20 years.
Yeah, and I just like to say this and just get this out there. I created Equipping the Persecuted because I'd been going to Nigeria for over 10 years, and I saw the persecution increase, and I saw no one doing anything about it. I saw a lot of organizations talking about it. I see people come in and do photo ops, but I saw no real on-the-ground action happening. And that's why I created that's why I created Equipping the Persecuted.
Well, there's a Catholic priest that I know very well, and I interviewed him many times. I did 2 60-minute stories with him and a documentary. And one of the things he said to me, because he investigated the Holocaust in Eastern Europe, 20 years. And he said to me, we love to build museums for genocide and monuments and stand up and say, never again, never again. He said, but why when the genocide is happening and we can actually do something about it, we can stop it.
Right.
Why then do we do nothing?
Therein lies the question. That's a thought process that's foreign to me, because if I see something going on and I can do my little part to play in it to help stop an atrocity, I'm going to be there to do it. And for people to sit back and just, people don't want to acknowledge horror. They don't want to acknowledge the horrors of really what's happening. And especially in Western civilization in the United States, people here live in a very comfortable bubble that have first world problems that could not even comprehend what a persecuted Christian is going through in Nigeria.
Well, how did it begin for you? Why Nigeria?
Well, my grandfather was an evangelist, or is an evangelist. He's 89, still evangelizing, and was doing some work in Nigeria.
What's his name?
Dwayne Wessels. And if I just say this, just as a Christian, if it weren't for him being rooted in the faith that helped root my mother in the faith, I wouldn't be here today. So I owe him sharing the gospel and keeping true to the gospel in the family as to why I'm safe today. And when I had my come to Jesus moment, my wake up call with God in 2009, he was working with a mission in Nigeria, and I come from a film video production background. And I was like, these guys need a lot of help, just talking about their good work they were doing in Nigeria and all that. But I fell in love with Nigeria. I just fell in love with the people, fell in love with the country, and thought I'd go back every year and, just help and serve how I could. But as I kept on coming back, saw the persecution increase, but I also saw a lot of missionaries not wanting to get involved with helping persecuted Christians because it might jeopardize their mission, might jeopardize their little silo of what's going on over here. And I asked all these questions. I was like, why aren't you guys doing anything about this? It's like, you have Christians being killed 10 miles away from your mission base.
It makes no sense.
Like, why aren't we doing anything about it? Well, that's complicated if we get involved, and they're just scared. They're scared. I don't know what God they serve because they're scared to do the right thing. But that's not the God I serve. The God I serve says, go run toward the conflict and do what you can. And we go under his protection.
Well, God also says, do not be afraid.
Do not be afraid. If he's calling us to do something, we better not be afraid to go do it. Otherwise, we'll end up like Jonah. But I just kept on seeing this stuff happen. And I started asking my Nigerian brothers and sisters in Christ, I said, what if we had an organization that responded to attacks? What if we had an organization that actually trained you guys in some basic self-defense and security skills? What if, we did these things? And they said, we need this yesterday. When can we start?
Wow.
I said, is anyone else doing this? And I talked to other missionaries, I talked to other pastors, and they said, no one else is doing this. And they said, we need this yesterday. And look, I'm just a weird guy from Iowa. I'm a guy from Iowa with a mission.
That's where you were born, right?
Where I was born and raised. And I just said, this is common sense. And for, a few, for a little bit of money in the grand scheme of things, we can do a lot here. And that's how we started.
And now I do have another friend, Mike Arnold, who lives not very far from here in Blanco, who also, he had a school in the refugee IDP camp over there, and they shut the whole camp down.
Yeah, that's it's sad. It's really sad.
I mean, the government is pretty brutal.
The government is, the government's brutal. They're, like I said, they're turning a blind eye to what's going on. But if they don't like a certain location, like a certain place, and when they move IDPs, like refugees in their own country, to another location, that's not their own land. They're on someone else's land. It's not government land. It's some other tribal land. And so you're putting people on land that's not theirs.
Well, and you're taking them from land that was theirs.
And you're taking from land that was theirs.
I mean, and for generations.
So imagine you're another tribe. You have your own dialect, your own culture, your own mini culture.
You don't want those people there.
Pushed to another land where completely foreign to them. You don't have the same culture, have the same customs as the other tribe on the land you're on now. And that's what the Nigerian government does. It's just, okay, we're going to take you survivors. Bloop, here you go. No infrastructure. Have fun. Try to survive. And then, well, if you import 3,000, 4,000, 10,000 people into a new community that's never had an additional 3,000 to 10,000 people in the community.
Yeah, it creates problems.
It creates a lot of problems. And that is one of the biggest issues that IDPs face. And they get no government protection or support.
Is the government working with the terrorists?
Certain parts of the government are, yes. I would without a doubt. I mean, we've got reports of military coming into a community saying, all right, everybody just lay down, and they watch the terrorists drive by to go to attack the next town.
It's terrible.
And we have seen instances where military or police engaged in a fight against terrorists, and they're shooting the bullets above the heads of the terrorists, and the terrorists are shooting bullets above the heads of the security for a dog and pony show and photo op, just to say, we engaged the terrorists, and they never really did.
Well, I know there was one story that Truth Nigeria did that, I mean, extraordinary reporting on, and that was the death of Deborah Emanuel.
Yes.
And I mention this now because there were 17 police officers reported to have been present while she was being murdered by an Islamic mob.
They watched it happen.
They watched it happen.
They watched it happen. And let's just be honest, and let's go into a greater aspect of this, is that Sharia law exists in the Muslim-dominated areas of Nigeria. And so they have Nigerian law and they have Sharia law. Sharia law trumps Nigerian law in the areas that the Muslims have control. And so when I mean Sharia law, this is how Deborah Emanuel was murdered.
Can you tell people what happened? Take them through it.
All she did was contradict somebody on social media, contradicted a Muslim thing, and it blew so out of proportion that they all said she blasphemed the Prophet Muhammad. She didn't blaspheme the Prophet Muhammad, but she said something pro-Jesus.
That's right. Wasn't it that she'd done really well in her exams?
She'd done really well in her exams, and she praised Jesus for doing well in her exams.
For her success.
For her success.
So she was, 20 years old?
20 years old, just finished her exams, graduated, and then...
A wonderful student.
And then they took that and said she blasphemed the Prophet Muhammad, got whole...
by acknowledging the existence of Jesus.
By acknowledging the existence of Jesus in social media, because she did well on her exams. And that was reason enough to get a whole gang of people to go kill her.
And take her out of her dorm, right?
Take her out of her dorm, and they beat her, they stoned her, and they beat her to death. And then they burned her.
And at first they went after her cousin.
Yeah, they thought her cousin
was her.
They thought her cousin was Deborah, but it wasn't her. And they found out it wasn't her. Then they...
Because local people who knew...
Yeah, they said,
hey,
no,
that's
not Deborah. And they went after Deborah, and police witnessed it.
And I think the only thing they did was fire a few tear gas canisters or something like that, but they didn't do
no, they didn't intervene
at all.
No, they didn't do the proper patrol. They had AK-47s. They could have stopped this very fast.
Now I know there was a security guard from the university that she was at who tried his best to stop the mob, and they just tossed him aside.
Yeah, they tossed him aside, and she was murdered because she just thanked Jesus for doing well on her exams.
While her father tried desperately to come to her aid.
Yes, and he couldn't make it because he was too far outside of town.
Yeah, by the time he got there, she was dead.
She was dead by the time he got there, and it's absolutely horrific. But Sharia law trumps Nigerian law. There is no due process. It's mob justice, especially when someone accuses you of blaspheming Muhammad.
Yeah, then it's over.
This is being in Nigeria.
Yeah.
Millions and millions and millions of Christians are going to die.
Well, how many millions are there in Nigeria?
There's population 200 million, and it's right now 50% Christian. If they get their way, that population of Christianity based on Islamic conquest will be reduced down to 10%. So we're talking 90 million Christians will die if we don't intervene.
Wow, those numbers are staggering. I mean, it is crazy how populated Nigeria is.
Egypt was once Christian. Went to a 10% Christian population. Arab Spring happened. Now it's less than 1%. Syria had a 10% Christian population. Now that's reduced down to less than 1% after Islamic conquest. But these were all Christian nations at one point in time. So everything Islam touches, once they get political control, the massacres begin.
Well, and of course, I mean, obviously that doesn't speak for every Muslim in the world, but you should be allowed to talk about it and discuss the fact that there is an organization within Islam that is, perpetuating this.
I want to get one thing clear to the people watching this, and really, so you can understand. I'm going to look at the camera and say this. The common story I get from survivors of these attacks is the Muslims came in, they did business together, they were neighbors together, their kids played together until the one day the attacks occurred, their neighbors were gone. They didn't tell their neighbor that they were going to get killed. And in many instances, survivors saw their neighbors partake in the attacks of killing their neighbors. Their neighbors saw their Muslim counterparts come in and kill people in their own village.